The year is 1943. In a damp English morning at RAF Thurley, the silence shivers with the tension of unknown futures. Giant four-engined B-17s and B-24 Liberators crowd the runway, their nose art faded by time and weather. The ground crews move, quietly beneath the hulking wings, prepping bombs, folding ammunition into belts, shouting last-minute checks to tail gunners and turret operators. For many, this is a ritual that has lasted almost too long. Every day, the same dread, the weight of casualty lists and rumors passed from briefing room to barrack. Inside a smoky hut, the young waist gunner Tom Reynolds sits wrapped in his A2 flight jacket, running thumb over the cool metal of his 50 cal gunnery sight. Around him, echoes of last night's mission flicker in stories told in exhausted voices. Accounts of flak bursts that rocked the aircraft, tracers sailing wild and harmless, German fighters darting through defensive fire. The doctrine he's learned since joining up is burned into his mind. You must lead your target. You must anticipate where it will be. The basic premise of every shooting sport and every gunnery manual for decades. The shout comes from the chalkboard. The enemy is fast. Aim ahead. Curve your shot so it meets them in space. But doctrine, as is often the case in war, is slippery on reality's stage. Reynolds recalls his instructor, a veteran gunner, his hand shaking slightly as he points to a dog-eared photo, saying, "Listen up. The Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf boys know your game. They know you'll aim ahead. They jink, they dive, they twist. They don't stay where you think they'll be." Still, the manuals and ground school habits persist. Diagrams, chalk lines, film reels, tracers fired, fighters dodging ahead. As the sun claws upward through the English mist, the squadrons prepare to leave. Reynolds and his crew take their positions. The pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigators, and Reynolds posted at left waist, scanning the world outside his plexiglass station. The engines rumble, and the lumbering aircraft lurches into the sky, joining a formation that grows at altitude, layer upon layer of machinery, men, and hope. At 20,000 feet, war is a world of thunder, ice, and anticipation. The radio crackles with coded orders and warnings. The formation edges towards the coast, toward the flak fields of the Ruhr, or the rail yards of Leipzig, or the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. The gunners are as nervous as they are vital. Luftwaffe pilots are clever. They have learned not just to attack with cannons, but maneuver in ways that American gunners struggle to counter. German fighters dive, swing past the nose or tail, and slip, often through the predicted streams of American defensive fire. Reynolds, gripping his handles, scans the horizon. That's when the attack begins. A flight of Me-109s rises from the cloud layer, shadowy figures in perfect formation. They split. Two climb for a head-on run, the rest coming up from beneath. Reynolds, following his training, lines up, adjusts for estimated speed, time, and a fraction of wind drift. He fires, his tracers arcing ahead of the fighter. It banks, predictably, just out of the stream, the rounds passing harmlessly through empty sky. He curses, listens to his co-pilot echo. "They're smart. They're using our own instincts against us." This was happening over and over, mission after mission, across all theaters of World War II. The American aerial doctrine, rooted in lessons from artillery and infantry, always led the target, was somehow failing in the merciless three-dimensional chess above Europe. After landing, gunners debrief, their faces haggard, some bloody, some grim. The officers ask, "What happened?" Reynolds answers, "I did what I was taught. I led the target. But they pulled away." Losses mount. Bomber crews express frustration, desperation. B-17s and B-24s, once lauded for their defensive firepower, seem suddenly vulnerable, their gunners struggling to score hits against increasingly skilled German pilots. In the smoke-filled war rooms from England to Washington, new questions begin to form. Why, with thousands of machine guns bristling from each formation, are so few Luftwaffe fighters shot down? Why does the old doctrine seem to fail right when it's needed most? The answers demanded something radical, not more bravado or bigger guns, but the courage to question everything believed about how to shoot down an enemy. The weeks at Thurley and airfields across England were thick with frustration and speculation. After every mission, the bomb groups gathered, the gunners dropping their kit and sitting heavily on battered benches in smoky debriefing huts. Charts hung on walls with red X's, tracking lost planes, lost men, and more, the rising numbers of Luftwaffe sorties that seemed impossibly to weave through hundreds of barrels and thousands of rounds. The talk was everywhere. We should be hitting more. Did anyone bag a fighter? Not me. They keep slipping by. At the center of this growing puzzle stood figures like Staff Sergeant Jack Dempsey, a gruff gunnery instructor with a reputation for pushing boundaries. Dempsey had spent months studying gun camera footage, poring over film reels that caught missions frame by frame. The slow-motion reality revealed something jarring. American gunners, by and large, fired ahead of their targets, just as trained, but the experienced German pilots seemed to anticipate every move. They jinked right, dove left, climbed unpredictably, and more often than not, passed entirely through the leading stream of fire unscathed. Dempsey began to ask different questions. What if we're playing into their hands? He mused, voice low and thick with old-world Brooklyn. He dug into manuals, tracked testimonies from returning crews, and finally started proposing a radical idea. Stop leading. Start lagging. Make them fly into your bullets, not through them. The idea rattled the old hands. Leading the target was gospel, a truth inherited from every form of military marksmanship. To aim behind felt like heresy, but chaos breeds experimentation. On a blustery October afternoon, a group of gunners assembled beside a battered B-17, its paint pockmarked, its tail shot up from the previous mission. Dempsey stood on a crate and addressed the crowd. Today, aim behind. Focus just aft the fuselage. Let the fighter jink into your stream. Initial resistance was fierce. The new technique felt counterintuitive, almost risky. If I miss, if I lag, I'll never hit anything, argued one waist gunner, his voice thin and sharp. But Dempsey held firm. The evidence is mounting. Let's see the results. The first trial missions were messy but illuminating. Crew after crew returned, some reporting misses as before, but an increasing number stunned by real results. I swear, said Reynolds, face pale with aftermath, I lined up behind an FW-190 rather than ahead. He swerved, straight through my tracers, damn near climbed right into the rounds. Others echoed, it feels wrong, but it works. The gun camera film was even clearer. Tracer streams, previously arcing ahead and missing, now caught twisting, banking fighters as they moved through the bullet curtain unexpectedly. Word spread. Dempsey convened meetings with other instructors, sharing results, discussing the mathematics of deflection, the physics of air combat. The gunners who dared to aim behind were recording higher hit percentages, bagging enemy aircraft at rates that startled intelligence analysts. The official doctrine shifted only reluctantly. Senior officers, skeptical of departing from established manuals, demanded proof. Dempsey and a cadre of reform-minded instructors ran statistical comparisons. The kill ratios among lagging gunners eclipsed those holding to textbook lead. Meanwhile, in the clouds above Europe, the tide began to turn. Luftwaffe pilots adapted, but the sudden unpredictability of American defensive fire forced them into riskier paths. No longer could they assume streams of lead would always pass ahead. Some pilots, old hands trained to evade, now found themselves plunged into harrowing fire even as they executed textbook maneuvers. At Thurley, The debriefing rooms were uneasy but animated. Teams shared details. "The whole thing's changed," Reynolds confided to another gunner over warm tea. "No more guessing where he'll be. Let him guess, make him pick, and sometimes he picks death." Dempsey's field notebooks filled with new annotations. "Aim just aft. Let reaction be your advantage, not theirs." The science came next. Ballistics experts were summoned. Men who spent their days calculating bullet arcs, wind drift, muzzle velocity, and reaction time. The basic arithmetic was clear. A fighter at high speed, anticipating a lead, would divert ahead and miss. Fire behind, and the pilot, nervous about that old pattern, would swing right into the rounds. Analysts drew diagrams, marking turning radii, closing speeds, predicting crossing points. Tactics had become about psychology as much as physics. In briefing after briefing, instructors hammered the point. Don't aim at him. Assume he sees you. Assume he's smart. Make him walk into your bullets. Some gunners were slow to adjust. Old habits, especially those learned under fire, die hard. But the numbers did not lie. Airfields began tracking comparative kills between leading and lagging gun crews. The totals favored Dempsey's camp more with every mission. On the ground, even bandaged veterans had to admit it. We're shooting down more, taking less chaff, fewer losses. There was a palpable shift in morale. Instead of dread, there was anticipation. The enemy could still attack, still slip through, but the myth of invulnerability was cracking under a new, strange form of calculated risk. Word reached airfields across England, down to Italy, over to North Africa. Tacticians emailed bulletins, revised briefings. Lag the shot, anticipate the dodge. Fatigue him until he runs scared. But no innovation in wartime proceeds in a vacuum. In Berlin, Luftwaffe tacticians issued new warnings. The Americans have changed. Don't trust your jink. Evade unpredictably. For every tactical evolution, there was a counter, a new layer of danger. In each smoky debrief after missions, tales of success mingled with grief for the ones lost. For Dempsey and Reynolds and all the aerial gunners whose lives hung on fractions of a second, it was a victory paid for in sweat, correction, and the courage to admit when old truths stopped being useful. War in the air is not just a contest of technology and courage, it is a relentless battle of adaptation, calculation, and split-second psychology. After the breakthrough at Thurley, ballistics experts deepened their involvement. The science of aiming behind the target required explanation and standardization across the American air arms. In hangars and briefing rooms, blackboards filled with equations. Gunners learned to judge their own aircraft's speed, the approach angle, closing velocity, and the likely evasive maneuvers of German pilots. The math started with simple trigonometry. Two bodies moving at high speed. One, the bomber, predictable. The other, the attacking fighter, trying to disrupt prediction. The ballistics instructors demonstrated using scale models and chalk diagrams. Tracer bullets travel at a fixed rate, slower than the fighters that zipped crosswise past the bombers. Instructors showed what happened when you aimed ahead, as taught. The fighter, aware of the attack, reflexively jinked away, escaping the path of fire. But aim just behind, and the pilot, seeking safety, would often swerve directly into the stream. Gunners practiced new sighting techniques and mental tricks. Don't just see the plane, Dempsey would lecture. See the intent. Let your fire be a trap, not a chase. He wants to live, and his best guess may kill him. Training films recorded at field schools across East Anglia were distributed to squadrons nationwide. Animated overlays depicted the fractions of a second that defined survival. Lines showing when to lag, when to lead. The danger zones and blindsides for both attackers and defenders. To ensure the method spread, the Army Air Forces initiated workshops, flying retired bombers with instructor crews at less dangerous bases. Young gunners fired at drones and remote-controlled fighter silhouettes, fine-tuning the lag-behind technique. On these flights, after initial resistance, instructors saw the shift in understanding. The moments when a gunner stopped wrestling with old habits and trusted the geometry instead. On the front lines, missions grew more intense. Reynolds, now seasoned and scarred by fire and frostbite, found himself watching German pilots more closely. "You could see the smart ones," he noted in his diary. "They didn't throw all their tricks at once. They tried to make you guess. It was a gamble every second." But as the new doctrine took hold, more Luftwaffe fighters began to take hits. Gunners relayed confirmed kills, sometimes grimly, knowing each victory came at a heavy price. Squadrons shared their own refinements. When the fighter comes in head-on, wait until he starts his swerve. "That's when you let him have it. Just a step behind, not ahead," said an Atlanta gunner at a greasy breakfast. "On a belly pass, don't chase. Lag and sweep. Let him cross your bullets." These rules spread almost as folklore, a badge of honor among crews who survived. Technical teams produced revised sights for turrets and waist guns. Some factories experimented with moving the crosshairs just fractionally rearward, engineering the psychological shift into the machine itself. Reports came in from the Pacific, the Mediterranean, from Ploesti and Berlin. The lag-behind doctrine was working in all theaters. Yet for each improvement came new challenges. The Luftwaffe responded, training its own pilots to brake more sharply, to confuse gunners by varying speed and timing. The chess match intensified. Some expert German pilots seemed almost to sense the change. Survivors wrote after the war about the moment they realized American fire was no longer easy to dodge. Coordination between ballistics, researchers and field gunners grew essential. Film was flown back to laboratories, analyzed in slow motion with rulers and stopwatches. Successes were charted, failures interrogated. Data pooled across thousands of sorties enabled further calculations. The science of survival in the sky. In battle, stories became legend. Veteran gunners recalled moments when, with adrenaline surging, their instincts warred with new techniques. Reynolds described once, eyes wide, "I saw his nose coming straight. I wanted to lead so bad. Instead, I trusted what I'd learned, watched him jink, fired behind. My round stitched his left wing right into the engine. He flipped, bailed out. Pure psychology. The effects went beyond defense. Bomber missions began to reach their targets intact more often. Morale grew. Gunners swapped stories of evasive shots made good, of B-17s returning with holes but with crews alive. Aircraft manufacturers began updating manuals and briefing booklets. Aim behind to anticipate maneuver. The official training doctrine in 1944 reflected the change. Commanders took note. Generals touring airfields asked for gunners by name, wanted to hear firsthand what worked, what failed. Staffers from Washington recorded interviews, intended to refine not just tactics, but the underlying philosophy of American air combat. The belief that adaptation, not rigidity, wins a war. Still, every victory was paid for. Every success bred new risks. Into 1945, Luftwaffe aces continued to appear. The game between gunner and pilot, a two-person duel at 20,000 feet, remained deadly and demanding. Some days, no amount of lagging could save the day. Other days, B-17s returned with kill marks in fresh white paint, attributed to the new doctrine by gunnery teams celebrating survival over heroics. Legend grew. The Americans had figured something out, something that could never be programmed or drilled, only learned by experience, resilience, and a willingness to adapt. The war's outcome was shaped by engineering, production, raw courage, but in the brutal arithmetic of aerial combat, sometimes a small shift, a new way to think, a new angle at which to shoot, meant the difference between life and death. By winter of 1944, the skies above Europe had become a crucible where new tactics were tested against old fears. For the gunners in B-17s and B-24s, survival depended less on brute force and more on the ability to outthink their attackers, often in mere seconds. The habit of lag-behind aiming, now hawked in every mission briefing and gunnery school, was slowly replacing the muscle memory of lead-ahead fire. Reynolds, scarred and cautious, entered each mission with a complex blend of hope and dread. The lessons of Thurley, the lectures by Dempsey, and the field scientists pulsed in his mind every time he gripped the .50 caliber handles. The world outside the waist window was an endless cyclone. Flak clouds, contrails, sunlight flashing off steel tails, and, always, the darting shadows that meant death. German fighters swooping in from every possible angle. Combat was chaos, never textbook. On one mission over Hanover, Reynolds scanned for movement. "Bandits low, 6 o'clock," came the shout. Reynolds blinked hard, tracking in Me-109 closing at high speed. Everything in him screamed to lead. Instead, remembering dozens of post-mission debriefs, he waited, watching the fighter slip sideways to dodge the predictable stream. He fired fractionally behind. The enemy pilot executed a perfect jink, right through the path of Reynolds's bullets. The left wing flashed, smoke streaming. The fighter dropped away, trailing debris. Reynolds slumped with adrenaline and relief. Just one duel of hundreds. Stories like Reynolds were repeated in hundreds of bomb groups across the 8th and 15th Air Forces. Gunner logs filled with terse notations. Lagged, hit. Jinked and lost. Evaded stream. Crossed into fire. The psychological dimension grew clearer. The best Luftwaffe pilots, trained for years to react a certain way, suddenly found the Americans unreadable. Some wrote in post-war diaries of the moment they realized the familiar tricks had turned fatal. There was an art to the new gunnery, a dancer's intuition. Faced with a typical belly pass, gunners learned not to chase the target, but to anticipate maneuvers, to see through the fear and trust their new instincts. "It was like laying a trap," wrote one veteran. "You didn't chase his tail. You set the stream. You let him run right in." Coordination among bomber crews also improved. The pilots worked with the gunners, sharing intelligence about expected attack patterns, warning them of multi-aircraft tactics where enemy fighters used distraction and decoys. Waist gunners began to communicate constantly, managing overlapping fields of fire, tracking not just individual attackers, but the tactics of entire squadrons. The effect on missions was profound. Where previously defensive fire was often wasted in vain, more and more gunners found themselves reporting kills. "We're coming back with fewer casualties," calculated a squadron operations officer in North Africa, poring over stats. It's not luck. It's a change in thinking. But the psychological battle was never one-sided. Some German pilots, quick to adapt, began employing more violent evasions, rolling and throttling down in erratic patterns to throw off the new trick. Over time, engagements became more desperate, the choreography combining machine and mind, luck and calculation. The emotional toll was immense. Gunners spent hours after missions replaying every attack, every second in which they paused their natural reflexes and performed the new drill. Reynolds, in his tent, would sometimes stare at his hands, so trained to reach for the old shot. "You can't imagine," he wrote his parents, "what it means to trust what you've learned, and then to see it work when you need it most." Morale on airfields soared and crashed in waves. When missions succeeded, crews traded stories with pride, sometimes a dark pride, shaped by the knowledge of lives taken and saved at 30,000 feet. When missions failed, frustration boiled, old doubts surfaced, and instructors worked overtime to reinforce the lag-behind doctrine, explain the science, and rebuild shattered confidence. At home, commanders pushed for further innovation. Gunnery instructors revisited every aspect of training, from classroom diagrams and animated films to live-fire exercises with drone aircraft, and psychological lectures on understanding enemy behavioral patterns. The science was never static. Each new mission, each scrap of gun camera footage, each after-action interview fed into a living system. Ballistics experts adjusted recommendations. "On close passes, give even more lag," one report suggested. On belly attacks, combine lag with a vertical sweep. The result was a new kind of aerial warfare, dynamic, ever-changing, human at its core. Each B-17 over Berlin, each B-24 churning over Ploesti, represented not just raw destructive potential, but the living experiment of survival and innovation. By spring of 1945, rumor and legend intertwined. German fighter units changed tactics yet again, spreading stories about clever American gunnery. Don't trust old rules, pilots were warned. Some Luftwaffe groups began to scatter at random, avoid formation attacks, and emphasize high-speed slashing runs or mass breakout moves, a desperate adaptation to the relentless learning curve of war. American gunners responded with equal desperation. Reynolds recalled once in Bavaria, firing at a swirling group of FW-190s, trusting not his hands but the accumulated wisdom of hundreds of dogfights and debriefs. "It's never exactly the same," he wrote, "but when you see the jink, that moment, you know you're not chasing. You're waiting for the mistake." Across thousands of missions and millions of rounds fired, the lag-behind technique was confirmed, refined, and made doctrine. Returns to base, intact and with fewer empty bunks, marked the change not only in statistics but in the deeper story of young men forced to trust adaptations that challenged everything they were taught. The human cost, as always, was incalculable. Some still died, some missions still failed. But in the cold calculus of World War II, the sons and brothers who came home owing their lives to a change in one tiny point of aim, to a willingness to listen, experiment, and survive, marked a victory far deeper than any tactical tally. April 1945, the war in Europe neared its brutal end. Allied armies raced rivers, swept through battered towns, the airfields of England alive with rumors and celebration tinged with exhaustion. For the men of the 8th Air Force, every dawn remained charged with silent uncertainty. The bombers rolled out again, engines louder than ever over runways muddied by spring rains, ground crews flitting between giant tires with last, anxious checks. Veteran gunners moved more slowly now, some by injury, others by the sheer toll of missions flown, comrades lost, cities burned. Tom Reynolds gripped the handles of his turret, an old hand whose youth had been devoured by sleepless nights and the relentless calculus of survival. The wisdom branded into every muscle memory was hard-won. For months now, he'd trusted not the instinct to lead targets, but the harsh new truth that lagging meant living. The mission that day was to Dresden, a run notorious for flak and desperate Luftwaffe last stands. As the formation crossed the Rhine, the call came, fighters approaching, fast, aggressive, seeking a final kill. Reynolds braced, recalling every lesson poured into him by instructors and corpses alike. He watched a pack of Me-109s arc in, diving, seeking the phantom zone where bullets never arrived. But Reynolds and his squadron waited, eyes measuring the split second when jink turned into error, fingers squeezing the triggers just behind. The enemy banked, desperate and clever, flying directly into the wall of fire laid not ahead, but waiting for them behind. The dogfight was ugly, swirling smoke and burning oil. But when the clouds cleared, more bombers remained, more fighters fell. Across Europe, these stories repeated and multiplied. Squadrons briefed their new arrivals. Don't chase ghosts. Anticipate the move. Let them do the work for you. The lag-behind doctrine became as natural as breathing, defended in every debrief, traced through every gun camera reel. Gunners swapped tales, some wild, some solemn, of missions where the difference between home and oblivion was measured not by bravado, but by discipline and calculation. The war's final weeks brought new chaos. German resistance, once creative, now dissolved into sporadic. Furious attacks by remnants of elite fighter wings. Luftwaffe aces flew on, desperate to make one last difference, but found the Americans had changed too much. Gunner logs for April and May swelled with strike-through entries. Pilot dodged, lagged to hit. Head-on attack, lagged, fighter destroyed. Jinked to evade, crossed into fire. The transformation was complete. What began in frustration and experimentation had become routine, doctrine, legend. Victory never felt clean or certain. Reynolds returned from missions his crew miraculously survived, only to hear about other squadrons lost in the same skies. The cost weighed heavy. For every victory, a reminder of all those who had not been able to adapt quickly enough, of all the bombers that would never return to these spring fields. After VE Day, the Americans gathered for the last time in huts thick with smoke and memory. Gunnery instructors, now officers, circulated among the men, sometimes in silence, sometimes in bursts of hard-earned pride. The academic papers written afterwards described a tactical revolution. The transfer of discipline from one way of seeing to another, the power of adaptation in the face of instinct and precedent. Across war-ravaged Europe and the soon-to-be Pacific, the lessons spread further. In post-war seminars and publications, the story was told in dry detail and in mythic narrative. The day the Americans learned to let go of what no longer worked, to trust the invisible line just behind the enemy. Military historians credited the lag-behind technique with saving thousands, preserving missions that otherwise would have faced disaster. The shift was hailed not as a measure of individual genius, but of collective, hard-fought wisdom. For survivors like Reynolds, the memories remained etched in flesh and bone, a constellation of missed opportunities and triumphant shots, the sound of engines over enemy territory, the whir of turrets, the moment when the suggestion to aim behind the target changed his odds of living. He kept his gunner's sight for years, a relic from the cockpit, inscribed with the names of fallen and returned alike. Families at home heard only parts of these stories. Letters hinted at changes in tactics, at the strange new art of killing, of outwitting men thousands of feet below, of trusting the lessons born of desperate necessity. The sons who returned were different, aged by adaptation, defined by the split-second gamble. In museums and reunions, the doctrine's legacy endures, a proud recognition that in air war, as in all conflict, survival belongs not just to the brave, but to the willing, to those smart enough, humble enough, and quick enough to change when change is the only hope. In the end, the question remains, asked of every gunner who took part in those final brutal months, why did they start aiming behind the target? Why did that tactic make all the difference? The answer, echoing in the hush after engines have stilled, is always simple and profound. Because on the battlefield, the mercy for some and the death for others lay in the courage to break from instinct, to see not where the enemy was, but where he would force himself to be. And that, as Reynolds and his brothers could testify, was the difference between defeat and legend.